Good evening, Trinidad and Tobago, and thank you for joining us on night 4 of the National Consultation on Education 2020. Tonight, we discuss blended learning. I am Matthew Gibbs, and it's my pleasure to be the facilitator for this evening's proceedings. Before we officially begin, I would like to wish a happy International Men's Day to all of the men of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you for doing your part and contributing to education. This evening in studio here with me, I have Dr. Lionel Douglas. Dr. Lionel Douglas is currently an assistant professor at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. He is the developer and program leader of the Masters of Education in Educational Technology and course coordinator for instructional design in the Bachelor of Education program. He holds a PhD in Instructional Technology and a Masters of Educational Technology. Also with me here this evening in studio is Mr. Ryan Ramcharan. He has extensive leadership management and teaching experience in academia, serving as subject head, Bachelor Information Systems at the UE School of Business and Applied Studies Limited, as well as in the public sector, serving as director, executive director, and board member at several organizations. Joining us virtually this evening, we have Dr. Gaynell Holdip. She started as a secondary school teacher in 1977 in the private school system and joined the Ministry of Education in 1991 teaching business subjects. She was promoted to curriculum officer in 2001 and enjoyed participating in developing innovative approaches to technical vocational education that employed the use of the internet and electronic devices. This evening we'll be exploring what blended learning looks like in the pandemic, what it will look like going forward, and I'd like to invite Dr. Douglas to start us off this evening to just express for a bit why he's here.
Good evening. I'm happy to be here to share on blended learning. As I thought about the subject, what came to my mind in terms of an analogy is a mule. A mule is the product of a horse and a donkey. And what we have is the blending of a strong animal with a fast animal. And you put that together, you get a third animal that is both fast and strong. We have these two forms of learning, face-to-face learning and online learning. Face-to-face has its features, online learning has its features. They both have their advantages and disadvantages. When we put online learning together with face-to-face learning, we have what we call blended learning. And it's the best of both worlds. A little later on in our program, we may be able to go through the different characteristics of online learning and the characteristics of face-to-face learning. And when those set of characteristics come together, we have a very strong platform for learning. In fact, when we put face-to-face learning with online learning together, and we try to duplicate or replicate the advantages of face-to-face learning with online learning, what we really have is what we call a virtual blend. It is virtual because we're really not in the classroom. We're really not in front of the teacher. We really don't have our colleagues next to us on the right side or the left side. But virtually we do, because in an online environment, we can replicate or simulate, if you like that, the classroom environment. We can have the same kind of interaction, the same kind of discussion, and that's why we like to call it a virtual blend. So in a virtual blend environment, you don't really break the online to go to the classrooms and come back. So that in a nutshell is what blended learning is all about.
Thank you very much, Dr. Douglas. Now, if persons are paying attention, we're operating in a blended environment right now. Here we are in studio face-to-face, while Dr. Holdip is joining us virtually. And it's interesting that you started us off by talking about the advantages and disadvantages of blended learning, because I'm certain that's where we'll be heading with the conversation this evening. So, Mr. Ramcharan, your perspective.
Good evening to the panel, and good evening to the members of the viewing audience. As we engage this topic of blended learning, one of the things that comes to mind is the whole challenge of what we call the digital divide. And what does that mean in the context of us delivering education, engaging in a number of activities in this online environment, as mentioned earlier? And what would be the role of the various stakeholders, teachers, parents, the education administrators? In fact, what is the role of society as we consider some of these pros and cons? And in this context, if we look at the international landscape, we begin to see certain key areas emerging. There are challenges, but there are also opportunities. And the real question in my mind is, how do we as a country begin to leverage those opportunities in the best interest of our future, our children? And that's where I really wanted to point out a couple areas that I've seen on the global landscape in terms of blended learning and the whole context of technology being used to create an empowered learner. The whole context of digital citizens, children being ready to face the challenges that they will be encountering when they move into the world of work. A knowledge constructor, innovative designer, computational thinker. These are some of the areas that we would have to delve into to better understand, dissect, and craft the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramcharan. And you see, you have now continued our conversation, which is what we have been attempting to do. On Tuesday, when we were discussing, we talked about parental involvement. And one of the key themes that was echoed all through was that it's not just the parents, it's everybody, all stakeholders. Again, the idea that it takes a village was echoed. And you make a similar point now, that it's not only going to be the teachers, it's not only going to be the parents. Everybody has a part to play in this journey, and thank you for that. Dr. Holdip, you have a perspective I'm certain that you want to share with us this evening. Your background comes from the technical, vocational, and skills training area. Do you have anything in that you'd like to share with us on blended learning?
I would like to share with the listening audience not only my concern about the technical and vocational needs of those students who are enrolled in those programs, but all marginalized students. And marginalized students, and perhaps I should add some marginalized teachers as well. We have special needs students, we have tech voc students, we have visual and performing arts students, we have physical education students, even science students who now must find a way of completing their program without access to the tools, the devices, the machinery, the spaces that traditionally we would have used to deliver those programs. We have barriers. We have a number of barriers to access equitably the programs that we believe have just as much value as the academic, as the normal or traditional groups of subjects that we count as successful achievement in education. So that would be my area of concern, that we identify those special groups, that we identify the barriers to access to the education in this blended learning environment, and find ways to allocate resources, come up with schedules and ways that those students, marginalized students, special needs students, can still benefit from all the great elements that blended learning seems to present. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Holdip. And you have now put us in a great place to have a conversation this evening, because you have started us off by talking about the marginalized groups that may be at a disadvantage when we look at blended learning and how that will look going forward. Now, before we delve into the conversation, because I saw both Dr. Douglas and Mr. Ramcharan nodding along while you were speaking, so I know that they have perspectives to share, I would like everybody to know how they can join the conversation. This evening, if you wish to have your voice heard, You may send in your comments through WhatsApp at 776-0440. You can call into the studio and join us here by calling 622-4010, or you can submit a comment on the Facebook live stream where it will be read right here in studio. You can access the comment stream at the Ministry of Education's Facebook page, or you can visit TTT Online Live. Dr. Douglas, while Dr. Holdup was talking, I saw you nodding, and we see that from your introduction, you are a part of creating instructional design and creating programs for teachers. When we talk about the marginalized students and how they can access learning in a blended environment, do you see this as something that can be a challenge, or do you believe that as it stands, there are opportunities to access all of these students?
There are opportunities to access these students, but marginalization is something we will always have to overcome, whether it is in terms of technology or other areas. But we cannot afford marginalization to stop us from forging ahead. Even when I grew up, I would have been probably a marginalized kid in terms of what technology, or in those days what we might call technology, what facilities I have. But here I am, so that every marginalized child must know that being marginalized is not really something to stop them from moving forward, because there are ways to overcome. Marginalization right now has to do with internet access. I teach online classes right now, and there are a number of students who don't have internet access, or whose internet access is very weak, the line is dropping, and all of this. One of the things we'd like to have is free internet access for all, free internet access at least for all students in Trinidad and Tobago, hotspots and things like that, and I believe that is coming. And so we have to be able to improve on that level, or decrease that amount of marginalization, so that everybody could have access. I think that undoubtedly technology and blended learning is the way to go. There is no turning back, COVID or no COVID. We have moved from different, like I told people when I was younger, my technology was a slate. You would know what a slate is. It was a slate. And after the slate, you move to the copybooks and the ink jug on the desk. You don't know about the ink jug on the desk either.
I won't say I don't know, I've heard.
Right. And then we had the blackboard. Now we have this form of teaching and learning. And it's an advancement in the way we teach and the way we learn. And it is advisable that the entire country of Trinidad and Tobago, including the powers that be, take hold of it and provide the people with the support that would enable them to learn in a blended environment.
Thank you, Dr. Douglas. And we saw your plug there for the free internet connectivity. And we do know that in the budget, it was presented that the Ministry of Education, in partnership with the Ministry of Public Administration and Digital Transformation, would be providing MiFi devices to students to allow for that internet connectivity that you are seeking. Now, Mr. Ramcharan, successive ministers of education have spoken about the Ministry of Education wanting to create for all students access, equity, and quality education. Do you think that access, equity, and quality, based on what Dr. Holdup said, can be achieved through blended learning?
I definitely think so. The real challenge is setting up the appropriate structure and systems to do so. I mean, for one, as a country, we do have a lot working for us. Our internet penetration rate is high comparable to the rest of the Caribbean. We do have infrastructure that has been put in by the ministry in a number of schools. But we do need to think about the other parts of this process. And that's where the technology is one part. It's an important part, but I think the even more critical parts are the support systems for students, support systems for parents and guardians, and even within the administration of education and how we think about education. What are the factors that we would need to bring to bear in terms of bringing that equity in a tangible way to every child in Trinidad and Tobago? And that is where I believe that whole understanding of that transformation, I think we're talking this whole context is about transforming education. And that transformation has to also come with a closer understanding of the unique learning requirements for special needs children, communities that may be challenged in one way or another. I can tell you from my experience teaching some of the primary school teachers, one of the areas that I work in is to allow them to explore the environment, to understand what are the facilities available to them. And there are some areas that they would go to complete their inventory, but that inventory turns up to be something that's lacking in terms of reaching out to their various students. So we do need to take a closer look at feasibility. And I would say small but strategic steps in the right direction can bring us big gains in the future. So this whole rule of blended learning can definitely bridge that gap. It will not, in my view, reach 100%, but it can definitely reach the majority. And in reaching the majority, create new opportunities for transformation.
And that's an excellent point. But I think it also ties into what Dr. Holdup is saying about ensuring that we cater for the marginalized. So based on what you've said, we also have to look at how we create programs and teach teachers how to teach.
Definitely.
When we are teaching teachers how to teach, we have to ensure that they are also being taught how to teach the marginalized, how to reach the marginalized. And in the conversations happening at the level of the Ministry of Education, they must be accounted for and factored in going forward, as we want to head into that, as Dr. Douglas pointed out, because we can't go back to what it was before the onset of COVID-19. We can only go forward from here. Before I engage you, Dr. Holder, because I see that you're ready to add your 2 cents to what has happened thus far, I'd just like to read some comments that we have online. From Lauren Semper Scott on Facebook. Blended learning can be successful when we have clarity on the foundation principles on which it stands. Some of our teaching practices make it difficult to fully capitalize on the power of the blend. We have Several Dios. I think we can use IVR, which is interactive voice response, and establish a toll-free dial-in system where students can access lessons via podcast. This will help greatly with digital divide. We have a comment from Amelia Hussain. Unless successfully planned and executed, blended learning can have disadvantages in technical aspects since it has a strong dependence on technical tools. These tools need to be reliable, easy to use, and up to date for this approach to be successful. Younger children, however, need more face-to-face to develop concepts than older ones. We have a call on the line. Good evening, La Romaine.
Hello, good afternoon, sir, the moderator and the panel and Dr. Holdup. Very pleasant good afternoon.
Good
to
evening.
you. Well, it's not a question, but just certain concerns. Blended learning is excellent, especially in this global environment. But my major concerns are, what about the various aspects of development of the child, especially the psychological, the social, emotional, interpersonal, in addition to the fact that there are different methods of learning throughout the human existence, right? So I am thinking that we need to make sure that we put in place things that would address these concerns. Because you see, we do not want a society that is only using the hands and, we need to develop the other aspects of the human, right? And especially nowadays where we see the society is going in a downward trend. We do not, as Dr. Douglas spoke about marginalizing, we don't want to marginalize such a great percentage of the population, right? So I know we have to take it in steps. So let's all see what we can do to make sure that we do not have a society that we will regret later on.
Thank you very much, Laromaine. Now, Laromaine made two critical points. She highlighted that holistic development may be a challenge if we're using a blended environment. She also highlighted that we have different types of learners. When we talk about different types of learners, we look at learners that may be kinesthetic, those that are visual, those that are auditory. And how do we access all these different types of learners in a blended environment? Now, I'd like to come back to you now, Dr. Holdip. You started off our conversation talking about the marginalization of students, and Laromaine seems to have alluded to that as well, that we can now marginalize students further by giving them opportunities to learn that may not be the way in which they actually learn. So can you speak to that, Dr. Holdip?
To me, marginalization covers a range of ways that students can feel that the system is no longer addressing their needs. So the person from Laromaine, the caller from Laromaine, indicated that we can look at the different ways that we have discovered that students learn, but it is interesting that blended learning experts can find ways to address the wide variety of these ways. It is the kinesthetic, practical, on hands-on, on the machinery, hands-on stage performance, running on the tracks. These ultimate needs are the ones that we may still have to involve more face-to-face than the totally virtual that some countries seem to favor. But I'm looking at marginalization also in terms, and I think the person from Laromaine also spoke to that. There are students who need the school environment. That is their safe space. That is where they meet up with peers. That is where they get counseling. Sometimes that is where they get food. And it isn't only standing a hamper home to them, but eating with others. I am very concerned, for example, that the early childhood care and education students who are no longer in their daycare, they are no longer in their kindergarten, they are losing out. Blended learning can't work for them really. We need, therefore, to be, as the person said, very careful about when and how we go forward with it. We must go forward, but we have to consider the fact that marginalization has extended beyond the student from the low socioeconomic class, moved beyond the persons with special educational needs. Marginalization now is approaching a crisis situation in terms of the number of students and even the number of teachers. And I mentioned that in my first comment, that we are also having teachers feeling marginalized because they no longer have that professional socialization, that in staff room support that they used to have. So,
thank you, Dr. Holdip. We have a call on the line from Freeport.
Hello, good night, Mr. Gibbs, and to your panelists.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening. So I wanted to add to the conversation about diverse learners. And while I agree with all that has been said about marginalization of many of our students, speaking specifically about students with disabilities, and especially our students with intellectual disabilities, I like to say that beyond marginalization, we have something that is more structural for these students. And so even when education was face-to-face, they were still, while education was available, we would say they were still experiencing issues of access. And so as we look to the opportunities or ways in which we can leverage opportunities in the blended learning mode, I think it is important that the Ministry of Education recognizes a major untapped resource, which would be our parents. Parents of children with disabilities, especially that cohort of students who have intellectual disabilities, severe to profound, They are the experts in their children. They know how to engage their children, and they have set high enough expectations for their children. And so I would want to challenge MOE to find ways via their special educators of Student Support Services Division and through quality casework of their school social workers to the school social work units to find ways in which they can engage with these parents and enable these parents to be able to extend that access to those students. And what you will find is that through blended learning and through this virtual environment, MOE may be able to extend the availability of education for an additional number of students who face-to-face were not able to access it, many times because the disabling environment, infrastructure, etc. And MOE may find itself in a situation where they can reach a little closer to that objective outlined in your 2017-2020 policy document that speaks to access to education for all our students, of course, with equity as our main goal. Thank you very much. I would listen offline.
Thank you very much, caller from Freeport. So that was a comprehensive recommendation on how it is we can go forward in a blended environment and cater for all types of learners. It ties into the points that Dr. Holdip made about ensuring that even though we're trying to make it accessible to everybody, that we ensure that the education that we're offering in these blended platforms is one that's beneficial, because you can't just say you have access, but it's not truly benefiting the students that are accessing this education. Dr. Douglas, before we went to the caller, you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, I wanted to make the point that the concern raised by the caller prior to Dr. Holdip concerning some of these social and psychosocial values and so on, these are not impossible in a blended environment. The teacher has the responsibility to sow culture and environment where all these social values, we have enough software today. Even we have virtual reality, and through virtual reality, students can work together. And there are other facilities and features in software which can enable group work and enable people to learn together and work together. And a lot of these software that are coming out could very much simulate a face-to-face environment. It depends on the skill and the ability of the teachers. So we talk about marginalized teachers, and we take a little twist on that. If we have teachers who are not trained and skilled and competent, then you can find that a blended environment is just an online environment with some face-to-face facilities or features, but blended really is more than that. It's about teachers. It's about teachers culturing a social presence, having a cognitive presence, having a teacher presence where you are just, for instance, if you take a simple thing like a breakout room in Zoom, and the teacher can visit each room and talk with the students in that room. And students themselves can be placed in their own room where they can have their own discussion. That is a slight introduction, a beginning of many of the things that can be done. So really, and the reason why we call it a virtual blend is that we are really taking the face-to-face characteristics that we are accustomed to and still having those benefits in an online environment.
Thank you very much. We have a caller on the line. Good evening, caller.
Good evening, Mr. Gibbs. How are you today?
I am wonderful. Thank you for joining us.
I'm happy to join you all today. So I think one of the questions that we need to ask is, do we have the data to make informed decisions? Because one thing that we know with blended learning is that there are various models. And of course, these various models will apply to various learners, different teachers, and we have to look as well as the resources available. Are we asking the right questions? So one of the things, of course, that we must do is ask the right questions. Who are our learners? What are their goals? What are their tech skills? When can they come to class? What are the characteristics of their geographical location? We have to also ask, do they have the infrastructure required? What technology resources can we, of course, as an institution, use or share? So each school, of course, it would be unique to that school. Then you have to take into consideration your teachers. What are the technologies or skills? What resources are available? What are their strengths? How are we now going to assess these students So all of these things, even does the school have the budget, does the ministry have the budget to facilitate? So one of the things, of course, is looking at the needs. What are the learning needs of our learners? So one of the things, of course, with blended learning, our goal as instructional designers or educators is always to look at the learning needs. And by asking the right questions, we can then make informed decisions. So, for example, with the Academy of Higher Education, a school that incorporates blended learning, what we do is before our students even enter the class, we ask them the questions. Have you ever used the technology before? Are you familiar with these? So that you will know the type of training that you need to provide. Remember, online is a new space, therefore we have to prepare them psychologically. All right? The same rules that would have applied to the brick and mortar, we also have to look at new rules and behavioral patterns. So we have to look at behavioral patterns or behavioral understanding to see how we can implement it in a blended learning space.
Thank you very much, caller. And I would like to give that to Mr. Ramcharan, but we're going to be taking a short break. So I want you to remember what was said, and I'll be coming to you shortly to discuss. So before we take our break, I'd like to invite the viewing public to join this conversation. You can visit the Ministry of Education's website to fill out a questionnaire and be a part of this conversation. You can visit moe.gov.tt/NCE 2020 and have your say. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Penny Gomez. Hi, I'm Penny Gomez, and welcome to another episode of Pop. Penny on Point with profiles on persons of interest. This is a show where we get to know some of your favorite personalities just a little bit better, where you get intimately involved because you can go on our social media pages and you have the opportunity to guess who is the person we're going to feature in this week's episode. Go online, submit your guesses. We provided clues for you, and you do so for amazing prizes. Yep, it's about that time. I hear a doorbell. Is that the doorbell I hear? I hear the doorbell. I hear the doorbell. I hear a doorbell. Let's see who's popped by. Hello.
Oh, this is called the no hangover.
That's how we do it at Pop. So see you soon. Thursdays, 5:30 p.m. right here on TTT.
Cheers to the vibes that we are. Cheers to the wish we could play, but we can't. But the drinks bring back all the memories of a carnival we've been to. No carnival, no problem. I want to share some memories with you on the 22nd of November. Why? It's all about a grateful virtual experience. EA Live in a dynamic, unique setting you've never seen before. Which part we're viewing this? On TTT, all yeah? So tune in 7:30 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Like this Sunday. Link up your friends and your family, and we enjoy it together. TTT EA Live.
Welcome back, Trinidad and Tobago, and thank you for joining us this evening for the 4th National Consultation on Education 2020 fortnight. This evening, you have the opportunity to have your say by WhatsApping your concerns to 776-0440, or you can join us live in studio by calling 622-4010, or you can submit a comment on the live stream at TTT Live Online or Ministry of Education Trinidad and Tobago. So we have a caller on the line from QREP. Caller, good evening.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Gibbs.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
I must commend you all. I really do appreciate this consultation and the voice that you've given everyone. This input is really crucial because everyone really needs to be involved to be able to adjust better. There's one thing I think I must bring to the attention. I don't think I should bring it to the attention of, but I really do think it's something that needs to be brought to the forefront. Changing from the environment in the classroom, being at home, it's an entirely different dynamic. And then when you introduce blended learning where there is a mixture of both, some students cannot adjust well to that, and it takes a lot of time, which of course is going to take away from the teaching time. So, I mean, that is something that needs to be considered as well, because even now on the online platforms, there are challenges. A lot of children can't focus in the environment that they're currently in. Even teachers, I think that sometimes the environment is not conducive to learning, and they now have to adjust and try as best as they can. So, I mean, I think strategies need to, I don't know how, but, they need to formulate strategies, not just, teachers doing it in isolation or parents doing it in isolation, but there should be a combined effort as to finding ways around that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirap. And Dr. Holdip, I'm coming to you to discuss that point because I know this was something that you raised just now. So, Mr. Ramcharan, before we went on the break, you had a point that you wanted to make to the caller that called in before.
Yeah. So the caller was identifying some gaps in terms of data and decision making. And I would say in that context, there is data that I'm sure is available through the Ministry of Education. The question would be the depth of that data in terms of informing that decision. But if we look at the whole context of blended learning and using technology tools, that will also begin to give us a data-rich picture that will help guide the country in terms of the way forward, in terms of how students are responding, what value is it bringing to their engagement process, both within the classroom as well as out of the classroom, and what systems might be best poised to help them to continue to develop. But the other part of it that comes to mind based on the feedback so far, when looking at a blended approach, when exploring a blended approach, we have to consider a learner-centric model in every part of the journey. And that means that we have to cater for the differences, the issue of the home environment, which becomes a very, very important factor in the learning process. And, talking to different parents, you're getting different perspectives in terms of, the supervision and how would they work in terms of their own commitment on a daily basis. And so those are some things that will also need to be factored into the design. So if we think of blended learning on its broader scale, we have on one side totally online, and on the other side we have this sort of mixed approach with technology and that face-to-face. The strategy moving forward, in my view, has to cater for the specific skills that will fit best in that blended environment online, and the ones that will work best in the face-to-face should be retained in that face-to-face environment. Therefore, that kind of hybrid approach should be able to give us some of the benefits that the callers have identified in terms of bringing that sort of transformation to the entire system as a whole. So key to it really is that learner-centric model and identifying the best approach in the context of how much technology is applied to the skills we want to deliver in terms of communicating that to our students, as well as engaging. I would say the other point that came out of that was the whole issue of teacher engagement and empowering teachers with the technology, helping them to understand. In fact, research shows that commencing a blended learning type initiative such as this one that we're discussing will require significant effort at the onset. It will require significant resources in terms of human resource, technology, but once we have crossed that plateau or crossed that gap, really, we will arrive at a plateau that things would continue to develop and be scaled up in terms of the skill sets that we'd like to see for the future of our children.
Now, Mr. Ramcharan, you've summarized what Dr. Douglas said, what Dr. Holdip said, the caller from QREP and the caller from Freeport. You highlighted, which is to Dr. Douglas's point, that we have to start somewhere. If we keep waiting for everybody to be able to be on the same page before we begin, we will never start.
Exactly.
And once we begin, then we will be able to see the research that Freeport was asking for. We'll be able to understand the needs of the student that QREP talked about, that not everybody will be able to manage in this blended environment. Now, Dr. Holdip, when the caller from Kirap was on the line, I saw you shaking your head in agreement because you have highlighted the challenges that different persons will experience in this blended environment. But Mr. Ramcharan has highlighted, along with Dr. Douglas, that we have to start somewhere. We are going to face challenges, but as Mr. Ramcharan said, we will plateau at some point as we have navigated those challenges and we get to a place where all our learners can be accessed and reached the way in which they learn. Is there anything that you'd like to add to what has been said thus far?
Well, I do agree that we have to take it step by step. I agree that we need the data, the information, but where our marginalized groups are, where our special needs students are, what skills the parents, the teachers, and even the students have to start with, and we need to build on that. And we need to be positive and hopeful that we can get most of our parties on board. And we cannot expect that there won't be those who will be left behind as we strive to reach that plateau that Mr. Ramcharan spoke of. I want to bring to the attention of the panel and the listening public that Trinidad and Tobago has undergone reform of their systems over and over again. We have had some successes and we've had some failures. The major, should I say, support for that success is when we have gotten the majority of people behind us and we've had a champion to push the change. Who is our champion for blended learning? That is my question.
Who is our champion for blended learning? And as has been stated by both Dr. Douglas and Mr. Ramcharan, everyone. Everyone has to be a champion at this point. So I'd like to just share some comments that have come into our WhatsApp and Facebook at this point in time. Jared David from San Fernando has indicated 100% access can be attained within the schools with the right architecture. 100% coverage beyond the schools can be attained with the right policies, strategies, example, broadband as a right, strategic hotspots, DMZs. Chelsea G. Charles. We might need to consider the creation of pods or centers in the community that can facilitate small, controlled groups, maybe one a day, a week, or to allow for the human interaction. Zaida Ventor on Facebook said, what we are seeing is some teachers taking their traditional teaching practices and moving these into the online forum with little to no adaptation. Teachers will need support and will need to see models of effective practice in order to make the shift. And Dr. Douglas made that point about adapting the way in which you teach in the online environment. Liana Alexander, a special educator from Tobago, stated that focusing on the benefits of blended learning with the appropriate structure, model, and training, blended learning will be an excellent opportunity for inclusion. Students will be able to access additional materials and complete activities online while receiving instruction both virtually, online, and in person. The community of inquiry model is an excellent blended learning model. One more comment that we had was from Jacqueline Morris that indicated it is not necessary. A huge part of learning can and should take place in an asynchronous manner. That is, not focusing on the screen and listening to the teacher, but rather having resources that lead the child towards discovering the learning for themselves. Now, that is a model that is very much a part of the ECCE sector. Children learn through play and observation, which is a point that Dr. Holdip highlighted. Now, I know that for you, Dr. Douglas, you have stated that at every level, persons can learn as long as they adapt the methodologies in which they're using to teach. So do you want to add anything to what this person has said, Jacqueline Morris has said, that the virtual environment, it's not necessary and it cannot facilitate the type of learning that is needed?
Well, not necessary is a very strong, strong way to put it. We could say that it is not the panacea for it. We could say that, yes, we can have virtual and we can have other forms of learning. But to say not necessary, I mean, nothing was ever necessary, if you want to call it that. When we move from one type of school environment or classroom environment or another. Was it necessary? We have to work with what we have and what is going on. Let me say that no one should think that what we have right now is the essence of what blended learning is. We have responded to an epidemic or to a pandemic, let's call it that. We have responded to that. And our response is not the ideal blended learning environment. In fact, what we have right now is what we might call a low blend or medium blend. And that is, we have tried to take the activities that we are currently doing and put them in on an environment. But really, a high impact blend, a really true blended learning environment would require, as one of the callers was saying earlier, would require proper instructional design to understand all of these things about our students, their needs, the environment, available technology, all the different things that impact upon learning and how that could be accommodated in an online environment. So that if you see blended learning 3 years, 4 years down the road, it might be very much different from what we have now.
And this is why we're here this evening, because the situation that we've been placed in as a result of the pandemic when schools closed in March, it's not the ideal situation. It is not the situation that we were expecting to be in, because the Ministry of Education was preparing to reopen in a blended environment, and then we had to go fully online, on fully home-based learning as a result of the coronavirus situation and it not easing the way we intended it to. So now we've been thrust into this situation, and that's why we're having this conversation. As we go forward in this environment where we have to have virtual teaching and learning, how do we adapt what we're currently doing to be able to facilitate all of our learners? I'd just like to add some more comments that we have here from online. It should have a balance. This is from Crystal Rebecca. I agree. Overuse of any of the two is going to fail, but it does require planning and preparation, which is not considered. So it will continue to have big failures. We also have to consider the human needs and mental well-being for both parents and teachers, considering their daily responsibilities and successfully implementing this new system. From Marilyn Robb, what we need to pay attention to that is repeatedly coming out in the conversation is that for blended learning to work, it is important to determine carefully what skills and knowledge can be taught through technology and which skills will need to be taught in live face-to-face interactions. The curriculum for blending a course should then be guided by that. Dr. Holdip, this is something that you're saying, that we have to ensure that we are adapting what it is we're creating to every learner and that we're reaching that learner where they are. What are some of the suggestions that you can give to ensure that we're reaching the marginalized learner? And as you indicated, every learner can be considered marginalized because of, be it a mental issue, a physical technology issue, just simply being burnt out. This can make that person marginalized. What are some of the suggestions that you would give to ensure that we're reaching our learners where they are?
I spoke initially about who will be our champion. Yes, we want everybody to be part of the solution, but it doesn't work like that in real life. In real life, we need a person with power, with access to funding, with access to policy, with access to program change initiatives, to take up this fight, to lead the battle, because it is going to be a battle. We do have a lot of negatives that are present in our education system, but we also have a lot of positives. I call on the Curriculum Development Division, which I used to direct at one time before my retirement. Curricula need to be digitized to meet the blended learning environment. We cannot just simply take the current SCA curriculum, the current CSEC curricula, the current CAPE curricula, and simply, as our caller said, transfer it to a virtual environment. The curriculum needs to be revised again with very clear goals in mind in terms of that most of it will be delivered in a different way than the face-to-face. We also need to develop resources that represent our context, our local context, our Caribbean context. A number of the resources that are available on the internet are from the UK, from the USA, from Europe, etc., and they're just not relevant. So curricula, student support may need to be transferred to family support, because not only do the students need support, but as an earlier caller said, the parents need support, the teachers need support. There needs to be parent skills classes, teacher skills classes. Administrators need also new skills in this new environment. So central ministry will have to make some changes as well if we want to see success in this initiative.
Thank you, Dr. Holdip. And the thread that continues to run all through our conversation, it takes a village. Everyone has to be a part of the education of Trinidad and Tobago being the success that we're all aiming for it to be. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back where you can join us to have your say on blended learning in Trinidad and Tobago.
Has the longest history of anywhere on Earth because it is here that humankind originated. When you're here in the Serengeti, it's clear that the rules of engagement are eat or be eaten. Just about every animal is either on the lookout for something to eat or is watching fearfully to avoid being eaten itself. And early humans were part of that way of life. It was all about survival.
The Division of Education, Innovation and Energy's e-learning program for primary and secondary school students resumes. Tune in daily to stay on top of your studies. Lectures designed to guide you so that you keep up with your subjects. Also, for supplemental lessons and worksheets, visit our interactive website at www.thadeie.gov.tt.
To the vibes that we are, here's to the wish we could play, but we can't. Got the drinks bring back all the memories of a carnival we've been to. Toast to the flags that we wear, and toast to the times that we travel.
Tune in to TDT for Grateful with Irfan Alves on Sunday, 22nd November at 7:30 p.m.
Night 4 of the conversation at the National Consultation on Education, and tonight we discuss blended learning. You too can have your say. You can send us a WhatsApp message at 776-0440. You can call into studio at 622-4010, and you can send a comment on our live stream at the Ministry of Education, TT, or at TTT Live Online. I'm in a blended environment, and it's clear that I too am learning as I go. So this evening, I'd like to share some more of the comments that we have online. We have a comment from Kevin Charles, who has responded to what was posted by the ministry earlier. One of the questions asked under the topic of blended learning was, what criteria would you recommend be applied for selecting the blended learning approaches to be adopted? The recommendation given, the criteria or principle in selecting an appropriate blended learning approach must take into consideration all the stakeholders involved and the impact that each stakeholder will have or experience with implementing the blended learning model or approach chosen. From Fiona Rajkumar of the Homeschool Association, the blended environment has the ability to cater to a wide range of education needs. It is different from a completely online or virtual world. There needs to be a system approach where we can use the theories to cater to the various needs of the students and teachers. So we need to do the research, and it is critical instructional designers work closely with educators, parents, and student support services to create something that enhances what we do. The learner-centric and learning-centered models are important. From Vamala Kamaluddin, what is more important is how the Ministry of Education plans and designs for the future. Can we make a hybrid model work? I think we need to rethink how we can amend policy and practice to embrace the future more seriously. Hybrid models can work with deeper understandings of what is needed for improved teaching and learning in Trinidad and Tobago. We must do better. Before we went to the break, Dr. Holdip was highlighting that there needs to be more through the curriculum development, planning division, through teacher development, and for every aspect of education, starting at the Ministry of Education, there has to be more that is done to ensure that everyone is skilled and understands how we're going forward in a blended learning environment. Dr. Douglas, the conversation has now shifted based on our online comments to what model will work best. Do you believe at this point in time we can say what model would work best?
I don't think that there is a specific model that we can say now. As I indicated in my earlier comment, instructional design, that's the tool that we need to determine the best model for a particular situation. We will not be successful with blended learning if we do not employ the services of competent instructional designers. Instructional design requires that one look into all the different variables: student, teachers, environment, administrators, course content, all the different things, and determine from the data, as someone was saying earlier, what is the best approach to engage students who need learning or need information. So to say at this time what is the best model, I don't know if we can say that now.
Okay, and to you, Mr. Ramcharan, based on what Dr. Douglas has said, we can't decide right now if there is a model that would work best for everybody. But is it possible to create a model nationally that we're all going to use? Or is it best that each school, each system, each whether it be district, figure out what will work best for their type of learners? Because as was indicated by Dr. Holdip, we have learners that are differently abled. We have learners that may just be experiencing challenges being in an online environment because it's not something that is the way in which they learn. Can we have a broad model for Trinidad and Tobago, or do we have to have individual models at the respective schools, institutions? What do you say?
So I definitely think it's a bit of both, actually, because I think the national model will need to set the tone for the schools at every level. And that model will form the foundation of everything else that is being built on it in terms of the blended learning approach. What I've seen, though, is getting that right mix of hybrid in terms of the design of the programs and design of the courses is essential, because I'm hearing a lot about the online, and I know we are really in emergency mode. As mentioned earlier, we simply took what we had and brought it into an online environment, which is not, in its purest sense, a true blended learning program. So even what we're seeing is shaping our perception of what it may be in our minds. And I think we need to just adjust that a bit, because as indicated earlier, our design has to factor in the instruction, the environment, the students. And I would say that a national model is definitely important, because I hear the issue of the owner, and that's very important to drive this process forward. And I will also add a little more to that in the context of change management and managing this transformation from the context of managing expectations at every level and finding the right fit. I agree, as indicated earlier, finding the right fit means that we have to explore environment and then identify the activities from the curriculum that will fit best into this online part of it, and then link that back into the whole face-to-face to create an optimized model for delivery.
Thank you, Mr. Ramcharan. We have a call on the line from Sawa.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Derek Mundy, President of the Association of Administrators of Public Special Schools.
Yes.
So I'm going to bring to you the perspective, some of the perspective regards to special schools, our special schools. All right? You're looking at a blind child who may be a parent, maybe a child of, of children, parents who are blind. Okay? Okay, so there are skills a blind child must acquire before even venturing on the online environment. Okay? Which means that there are hands-on training that these children must have. For instance, typing. To be able to use a computer, they have to know to type. They have to know to use the assistive technology, that's the screen reading software, because they have to be trained in those skills. And a lot of those skills have to be taught face-to-face. Braille, reading Braille. All right? Of course, there are what you call the refreshable Braille displays that you can use on the online or on the computer. Okay? These skills, learning to read Braille, it has to be done face-to-face because there are skills that they have to know to use their fingers to read the Braille. They have to know to use their fingers. They have to be taught in touch typing. So their fingers, their hands, right? The use of the hands, they must know where all those keys are on the computer keyboard. So to assist with that, you would have had to have persons, classroom assistants, right, or the teacher assistants. They have to be well trained to know how to work with that child. So we are now faced with a situation whereby the skills that the child needs to learn to be able to even work in the classroom, they have to get that skill to be able to work online. So I just want to bring some practicality into this whole thing regards to the blind learner, all right? Because they are now in a quandary because you do not have enough trained personnel to get around to work with each child in an online environment. So therefore, I know there are certain instances with the blended learning where you have to have face-to-face. And the kind of time that you have to put out within that, the limited time period, they are placed at a further disadvantage. Okay, so I'm just trying to bring some sort of practicality, practical situations that our blind and visually impaired children are facing. And in addition to that, there are some of them who have multiple disabilities.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mondi. We have a call on the line from Tobago. Good evening, Tobago.
Good evening. I would like to contribute to the idea of going back to school around January. I would like to say that from Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we could go to school, and for the rest of the days, we could stay home and do Zoom.
Thank you for that suggestion. So, Mr. Ramcharan, the caller prior, Mr. Mondi, highlighted some of the challenges that all learners that may be blind may experience. But right before that, you were making the point that we have to understand that in a blended environment, that will be accounted for. That what we experience now is a purely virtual environment, and a lot of persons are missing that in a blended environment, we will have the opportunity to have the face-to-face interaction that is needed. What Dr. Holdip also highlighted was that when we go forward in a blended environment, these are things that we have to factor in our instructional design. So the blended learning environment in a special school cannot look like the blended learning environment in a neurotypical school. So these are points that have been made. But what persons are not grasping is when we create this instructional design, let's say we go back to school in January, most people fear that it's not going to look as cookie cut as has been expressed by Dr. Douglas, has been expressed by yourself. Dr. Holdip, I'd like to hear from you. What do you think, let's phrase it another way. How do you think the Ministry of Education can allay some of these fears that persons have in going back to school in a blended environment?
How can they? Well, they have certainly made a start with this consultation. The methodologies being used that allow the public to call in, ask questions, but also provide their perspective is a good start. This is a good start. How they go forward in January, I'm sure the persons at the top and the middle managers are very concerned as to whether people will be able to get back to at least a couple of days face-to-face and still believe that their children are safe. Public education, constant messaging, not only through public means such as the television, but certainly there's a need to have small groups. Parents need to have their fears allayed. Students need to feel that they will catch up to the traditional exam deadlines. Right now, people are struggling to do their school-based assessments online because as far as they know, the normal deadlines are still in place. Is that true? Is that information being shared? Is CXC saying anything about whether they are prepared to change the way that they assess and test? Are they going to fit into this online hybrid blended learning environment that we believe will go forward in 2021? Those conversations need to be had and the information needs to be shared with the public.
Thank you, Dr. Holdip. And the caller right before, which seemed to be a student, expressed that it would be imperative to get back to school, whether it be Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that they're face-to-face, and Tuesdays and Thursdays they can have an online session. That tells us that our students themselves they understand what a blended environment can look like, and they are ready for that. But as Dr. Holdip has pointed out, how do we engage beyond this conversation that we're having here to ensure that persons understand what this blended environment will look like, how students will benefit, and how they can go forward? Because as was expressed, parents have fears, students have fears, stakeholders have fears. What does this blended environment look like, and how will all of our stakeholders benefit? Dr. Douglas, we're going back. We're creating a scenario here. We're going back. School opens in January. Ideally, what would that look like?
You know, a lot depends on COVID.
Ideally, where we've created a situation where we can facilitate a blended environment, what would that look like?
I believe it would continue to look like students still having to access material, access information, access instruction in an online environment. I want to say that we talk as if blended is new. Blended is not really new. It's just the weight of the blend. In other words, we are heavily weighted on the online side. But before all this hype about blended, you could have gone to school, and even though in the early stages, a lot of teachers would say no cell phones in class and all that stuff. But soon, very soon, people learned that you could be in class and you can say, students, get out just your laptop or your phone and check out the meaning of something. That is blended. That is combining your traditional face-to-face environment with some way in which you can access material online, contact people online, and all those kind of stuff. But it was light in terms of the blend. So it was always there. So what we'll have to look at in January is how heavily weighted can we have more now face-to-face environment than the online environment, or do we still have to stay with more online? Because really, What we have right now is no face-to-face. I mean, there's no blend well here, it's just fully online.
Thank you, Dr. Douglas. We have a call on the line from Mount Hope. Mount Hope, good evening. Mount Hope, can you mute your device before you begin, please?
Yes, good night.
Good evening.
Pardon? Yes, good night.
Mount Hope, can you mute your device,
a
please?
serious problem. My internet was cut, and my two teenagers who are online classes have not been able to access it because of this problem, where the internet was cut without any problem, without my owing them. They tell me it's $70 I want. They cut the internet since the 12th of November. And now I'm having real problems to get the whole thing rectified. And I don't know where to go. So online learning is fine. But we have many, many problems. How are we going to, come to terms with that? And what are we going to do to get this rectified?
Thank you very much, Mount Hope. And these are some of the social challenges that persons are experiencing. We have a call on the line from Arima. Arima,
Yes.
good evening.
Good evening. I represent the Arima rebranding team. We have been interacting with blended learning and hybrid learning experts in the United States for the past 2 years. I joined the program pretty late. One has to understand the genesis of blended learning. Blended learning started in black communities where the black parents did not have enough money to send their children daily to school. And they could have only interacted teacher to pupil 30% of the time. As a result of that, they decided to develop programs which would support the learning at home and also in the community. So those are some critical issues. And in our local context, I think that is where, because we have a fixed national curriculum, the Ministry of Education will have to rethink that. And then on the location of the schools and the resources that are available. Because what you will find is that in some places in Trinidad, because it's because of the socio-economic situation, there are more opportunities. So therefore, you have to blend what you have depending on what is naturally available. So in Togo, for example, there are certain things that you would have to blend into the national curriculum, which has not been really approved. So that is an area I think the ministry, first of all, has to look at. If we want to hold on to a fixed curriculum and not giving the school the opportunity to expand on that to meet all the requirements of the national curriculum, we would be really falling far behind. I've submitted some of this material to the Ministry of Education, and we are waiting a meeting with the minister to discuss blended learning and some new ideas on education. At this point, I would stop at this point, but we have a lot. I'm in contact with some of the best exponents in blended learning. And that is what we
Thank you very much to the Arima rebranding team, and thank you for continuing to join us nightly for this conversation. We have Arima again on the line. Arima, good evening.
Hi, good evening. I have two children of primary school age doing online classes currently. And what I am seeing is that teachers, they are not at all prepared to do online. What has the ministry done in terms of preparation for the teachers? They are demanding things out of the parents that they themselves don't even know, in terms of the usage of Google Classroom, in terms of the usage of Zoom and all of these platforms. So I'm very much interested in, okay, if we have to continue come January, what is happening, because the teachers, they are screaming, they are getting impatient, and we have to understand that this is a situation that we all have never gone through. Parents are becoming overwhelmed because some of them still have to work. And what is the ministry doing in terms of preparing the teachers for this next step?
Thank you very much, Arima. We have St. James on the line. St. James, good evening.
Good evening to everybody. My concern is I have two little ones, primary school level, infant level. And I am still very concerned in sending them out to school in January, because even though you would drill into them to practice social distancing or so on, when little children, when they come together, no matter how you speak with them or so, someone is there, they will still congregate. And I don't know, my concern is, what age level are you all sending out to school in January? I have my concern is, with the infant level going out to school in January, and especially where I'm not sure if schools have the equipment, like how you see some schools, the school in Moruga, for example, that had the plastic stuff around the desk and so on. The main question is what age level you all are sending out to school? I believe it should be the older ones first, so that it will be like a test pilot to see, how the students behave when they return to school, and then probably bringing the little ones. So I have a fear of sending my little ones out to school, and that's just my contribution. Thanks.
An understandable fear, St. James. Thank you very much. We have Aruka on the line. Good evening, Aruka.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good evening.
Yes, good afternoon.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Yes, my concern is early childhood, and my contribution is that early childhood education actually is on a paradigm shift right now, where we are moving forward into a different realm. All right. I don't think I am the only person who's of the opinion that education will never be the same again. It will never look the way it was. All right. And so we need to start thinking differently. Okay. Early childhood is the way that it starts, because our young children now are experiencing something that the others have not. All right. Blended learning is definitely the way forward. The hybrid model, all of that. I totally endorse what Dr. Douglas stated. And I think that we all there would be challenges, because with every new concept, there comes challenge. All right. But as a nation, we need to put ourselves forward and work towards what the entire world is undergoing, a different shift in education. All right. And there will be, as I stated, challenges, but we need to definitely look. We have heard a lot of what these stakeholders stated this afternoon in terms of what the challenges that they are experiencing, or even some that would be coming forward. And what we need to do is, based on the information gained from this consultation, is to put that in place and move forward in a very positive way. And I think that the blended learning is the way forward, because we do not know exactly what is going to happen. And that's just my contribution.
Thank you very much. Now, one of the major concerns that has been echoed thus far, starting with Dr. Holdip and moving into our callers, was the idea of preparedness of our teachers and administrators to thrive in a blended learning environment. Now, the Ministry of Education has indicated that through the Teacher Education and Professional Development Division, teacher training has been continuous, even before the pandemic had set in. But now the concern is how many of these teachers has this division been able to train up to this time? Are all of the teachers in Trinidad and Tobago capable of being trained in order to facilitate a blended learning environment? In addition to that, Dr. Holdip made the point about assessment. What does assessment look like? Dr. Holdip expressed that we have students that are preparing for CSEC, for CAPE, and we have SEA students as well. What does assessment look like in this blended learning environment? So we have two things. We have teacher preparedness and administrative preparedness. We also have assessment and how we manage the two in this blended environment. And I would like to put this to Dr. Douglas. Can we prepare all of our teachers for a blended environment? And also, what does assessment look like? But before you answer, I'll give you a minute to think on it. We have a caller on the line. Good evening, caller.
Good evening. Calling from Cuba. My suggestion is that when school reopens in January, that the first set of children should be out there are the first year and second year students. They should go at least for the first, like on a Monday, they go open for like half day on a Monday. Now, these are the like infants, first year and second year students. And then on a Tuesday or so, you have the first standard and so on, and you have to space them out the different days. Now, because the first year usually will have about 3 classes of first year, and you may probably have about another 3 classes of second year students. And these are the students that have to get climatized to the school environment. And while being climatized, now because of the new norm, these students will be trained as to cleansing, hand cleansing, sanitizing, distancing, and even the use of using the tablet or the phone to get online, because they know about it. But if you notice that they don't sit down, I have some grandchildren, I want to get them to sit down and concentrate for half an hour, so it's very difficult. So you have to teach them about the use of it, and then also tell them, well, okay, on Wednesday when they may not have school in school itself, but on Wednesday or Thursday or later in the week, we will be online, and they expect to see them online, and that's how you need to introduce it to some of these students, right?
Thank you, Kuva. So our more inexperienced learners have to be the ones that are given the opportunity first, is what you're saying. Thank you for that. We have a caller on the line from San Fernando. San Fernando, good evening.
Yeah,
please mute your device.
The last caller touched based on the infant part of my concern. But I was wondering if when the older students go out to school in January, let's say a class has 40 students, why not use 20 students from that class in the morning period and the next 20 in the evening period, so that you have a proper separation of the 40? I don't know if that could work.
Thank you very much, caller. So we're looking at a rotation system, something that Trinidad and Tobago is accustomed to. We have de-shifted, and now we're looking at the possibility of having to go back to a shift system. So, Dr. Douglas, before we took our calls, you had a point that you wanted to contribute.
Yes. Concerning the parents, it will be a monumental task. And or the teachers, it was the teachers. Parents need training too, because from all reports I hear of teachers, of parents who badge into online meetings and asking questions and want to say boof. Boof the online teacher and all the different things. This is a new culture for parents, and they have to learn that. But Teachers, by the way, that would be a monumental task. I believe, however, that every institution, University of the West Indies, USC, UTT, must now include in their teacher training programs a compulsory course having to do with online teaching and online learning. That must be. And I'll tell you why. Because students are seeing the future. And we as digital immigrants, and I say we as digital immigrants, should not stand in the way of the digital natives. This year, we have had the highest amount of applicants for our Masters in Educational Technology. And that is because the applicants see the way, they see the future. They are thinking, wait, I better prepare myself for teaching in an online environment. If these digital citizens are seeing that, and I don't know if they're so much a citizen because they're in the 20s and 30s, but still, they are the young ones. They are seeing the future. We shouldn't stand in their way. I wanted to make a point about assessment. Is the biggest challenge that we have. How do we assess in a blended learning environment? I could say there are students who have found a way to advantage the system. Take pictures of the questions on the screen, send it to their friends, bring up another computer with Zoom and talk to their friends about the questions. And that is because our method of assessment is so summative. It is more the European style, a study for a whole month or whole term, and at the end we give you some questions and you got to answer. We need to move away from that into a more progressive type of assessment and a more authentic kind of assessment where students are being graded based upon ongoing performance within the environment. And that would, that would assist us in being able to properly assess students. It's a big challenge, but we can do it.
So we have assessment, we have teacher training. Closing comments, Mr. Ramcharan.
So I definitely agree that we need to relook this whole idea of assessment. In fact, the authentic assessment is something that we have to seriously consider. As we move forward in this journey, I think there are several factors that I would like to highlight that we must seriously consider. The technological factor, of course, is with us. Teacher support, student support, parent support, the evaluation factor, instructional design, and the institutional factors are all areas that we would need to delve into and identify what is the best mix that will meet the needs of our country and our children at large.
Thank you, Mr. Ramcharan. And Dr. Holdip, as you summarize what you have gained from this evening and what you would like to add to the conversation, what are your closing comments?
We are being asked, country, as educators, to make some cultural shifts, some very, very difficult cultural shifts. We have taught our teachers to be autonomous in their classroom. We have expected our students to sit and listen and learn from the masters, those who have mastered the content. We have subjected our students to summative examinations that appear to determine their future. SCA into the best schools, CSEC passes at least 5, etc., etc. And we are being asked to make changes in every arena. But our biggest challenge is in shifting the way we have been thinking about what is an educated person, what is the best citizen, who we would want to be our leaders and our teachers and our elders. That is a big area that is no longer static and expected and what we have been living with. We have got to be revolutionary and progressive and think outside the box and be even controversial. What I'm happy to say is that between the webinar yesterday and today's event in which I'm taking part, I have become aware, and I hope the ministry is aware, that we have a vast group of persons with the talent, with the expertise, with the understanding, and we also have access to those outside who can help us make those cultural shifts. not
Thank
only
you.
in terms of skills,
Thank you, Dr. Holdip.
behaviors, but in attitudes.
Thank you, Dr. Holdip. And we have come to the end of tonight's discussions. Blended learning, what will it look like? We have to integrate all of our stakeholders. We have to be conscious that as we go forward, we have to ensure that all of our learners, marginalized and otherwise, are engaged in the way in which they are able to learn. We have to look at assessment as we go forward, and we have to ensure that Trinidad and Tobago is cognizant that blended learning can do what is needed to be done, but we have to ensure that we're doing it from an informed perspective. Trinidad and Tobago, it has been a great experience having this conversation, and we look forward to continuing it with you on Tuesday as we continue the National Consultation on Education 2020. I'd like to say thank you for my panelists this evening and for all of you who have joined us online and given your comments in studio. Thank you, thank you, thank you. As we close, tomorrow we celebrate Universal Children's Day, and we'd like for all of you to just hug your child. Tell your child that you love them and celebrate them, because it has been a difficult year for all of them thus far. From the Ministry of Education, from all of our panelists this evening, happy World Children's Day, and for Trinidad and Tobago, have a pleasant night.